All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. We have the great zechus in Hashem to begin the second parak in Maseches Nazir this morning. I'm going to begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Shvat, Mrs. Bracha Strimber, in memory of her husband Avraham ben Kalman, Eliezer, HaLevi, Bracha, and to thank Ayal Sara Steinberg for dedicating all the Sherman Drashos this month in the zechus of refuah sheleimah for Shulamis bas Susha, and to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Gregg and Rachel Levitan, wishing a mazel tov to the entire shir, as well as to all of the Magidei shir, including Rabbi Richter, Kalman, Akiva, Kovacs, for the incredible completion of Maseches Nedarim, and Amir Hashem Ara Haschala of Maseches Nazir. Beautiful. So with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Daf Tes. We are in Meretz Hashem picking up at the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says, we'll say a very interesting sugi ahead of us today. Hareini Nazir min hagrogros and min hadvela. We'll say a very interesting case. A person goes ahead and says, I am a Nazir from grogros. Grogros are dried figs, and dvela is a cake of pressed figs. So I will say, no, you haven't misunderstood anything. This has absolutely nothing to do with Nazir. And that's exactly the point of this declaration. A person has gone ahead and said essentially two things. I am a Nazir, that's part one, but then he qualified the terms, or seemingly qualified the terms of his Nazirus by prohibiting things which have absolutely nothing to do with Nazirus. So in this case, again, remember, a Nazir has no prohibition regarding figs of any sort, dried figs, pressed figs. Again, what's the impact of making such a neder? Beishamai omrim Nazir. Beishamai says the person is a Nazir. Interesting. The person is a Nazir. Beis Hillel omrim. Beis Hillel on the other hand say Eino Nazir. He's not a Nazir. Okay, we'll delve into the machlokas a little bit more in the Gemara. Now here's what's interesting. The Mishnah ends off with a fast. Shabbos says this is machlokas. So Beishamai says you're a Nazir. Beis Hillel says you're not a Nazir. Rabbi Yehuda qualifies this. He says, Af kisha amru Beishamai. So Rabbi Yehuda comes along to qualify Beishamai. Rabbi Yehuda says that when Beishamai says that you're a Nazir, lo amru ella ba'omer harei hein alai karban. When Beis Shammai says that you are a Nazir, Beis Shammai only meant this in a situation where a person says, these figs are harei alai karban, are prohibited upon me like a karban. Now what's going on over here? So I'm going to draw your attention to the Rush. So the Rush in the left-hand margin, the Rush says as follows, in about 3 lines in Rabbi Yehuda, Af kish amru Beishamai lo amru ela kish ba'omer harehin alei karban. The lo nech. So Rabbi Yehuda has an interesting interpretation here. He says as follows: the lo nechleku Beishamai Beisila inyan Nazir, the mode Beishamai the lo havi Nazir. So Rabbi say there is a fundamental machlokas in the Mishnah between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. In the Tanakama's version of the Mishnah, there is a fundamental machlokas Beishamai Beisila about whether or not a person becomes a Nazir when they say Hareini Nazir mina grogros or mina dvela. Beis Hillel says you are not a Nazir in any way, shape, or form. According to the Tanakama, Beis Shammai says you are a Nazir. You are a Nazir. That's the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says no. Beis Shammai agrees you're not a Nazir. So what is Beis Shammai coming to add? So look at the Rush. V'lo nechleku ela ba'omer belibi haya shiyu hagrogros alai karban. So I will say, Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says in the following situation, if the vower were to come along and say, listen, when I said hareini Nazir, minad dvela, minad grogros, minad dvela, what I meant to say was, I was using the lashon of Nazir to create a prohibition of grogros and dvela upon myself as if they were a karban. In other words, he claims that he was utilizing the formulation of Nazirus to create a prohibition for himself for figs and for dried figs and for a cake of pressed figs. In other words, regarding Rabbi Yehuda, he qualifies his statement, I know I wasn't becoming a Nazir because Nazirus has nothing to do with figs, but I was utilizing the lashon of Nazirus to create an isra upon these items. Shua grogros alai karban, Beis Shammai omrim dahavi nadr min hagrogros. So I will say, in that case, Beis Shammai will say, that is a valid neder. Not a neder Nazirus, but a neder to prohibit figs. Beis Hillel sabri delo havi neder. And on the other hand, Beis Hillel holds that halacha l'maisa, this is not a neder at all, since it was a fundamentally flawed formulation. Say for Rabosai, what's happening over here is two versions of Machoges B'Sham Beis Hillel. Tanakama's version is straightforward. A person says, Harini Nazir. Minat grogros, minat dvela. I'm a Nazir from figs. From figs, Beis Hillel says, absolutely meaningless statement. Beis Shammai says, you are a Nazir. Okay, we'll have to understand why Beis Shammai says you have a Nazir. We'll get to that. That's version 1. Version 2, Rabbi Huda, no. Everyone agrees that when you say, Harini Nazir, minat grogros, minat dvela, you are not a Nazir. So what does Beis Shammai mean when Beis Shammai says you are a Nazir? Rabbi Huda says what it means is if the guy comes along and qualifies his statement, and again, says, I didn't mean to be a Nazir, but rather again I meant to go ahead and prohibit figs upon myself. I was utilizing the lashon of Nazirus in order to create a state of prohibition upon figs. Beis Shammai says, we believe him. We believe him, and therefore figs are prohibited upon him. Beis Hillel says, your entire formulation is absolutely unnecessary. Or I should say absolutely meaningless. Good. So we'll say, let's analyze. Says the Gemara. Harini Nazir minat grogros minat dvela. Suppose the Gemara quotes the Mishnah. I am a Nazir from grogros and from dvela, dried figs, and a cake of pressed figs. Beis Shammai omrim Nazir. Beis Shammai says that you're a Nazir. Va'amai. So Gemara will say a fundamental shayla. Why? Why would Beis Shammai? It says it is in the Tanakama's version. Why would Beis Shammai hold that you're a Nazir? Mikol asher yaseh migefen hayayin amrachmana. So I'll say Nazirus has nothing to do with figs, right? Nazirus has everything to do with wine, with grapes. And remember again, as we've seen already, so Nazirus will govern even all parts of the grape, but Lamaisa Nazirus has nothing to do with figs. So why would the Neder Nazirus devolve upon a person when he says minat grogros or minat dvela? Amrachmana. So I'm sorry, Beis Shammai sabila Rabbi Meir. This is incredible. Because the Shem holds like Rabbi Meir. And what does Rabbi Meir say? Da amar ein adam motzi dvarav levatala. It was a profound statement. Rabbi Meir says, people don't say it. There's nothing a person says that is without meaning. Right? HaLevi. Right? HaLevi. Right? Nothing a person says that is without meaning. In other words, Rabbi Meir will say, you have to understand, Rabbi Meir is coming from a perspective that people value their words. People value their words. People recognize, I will say, it's a beautiful onkelos. Onkelos says on the pasuk, "Vayipach ba'apav ruach chaim," that when Hashem breathed life into Adam Arishon. So how does onkelos define ruach chaim? He says ruach mimalala, speech, mila, speech. But the very essence of life of a person is the ability to speak. And also that's how we see that in life. Sometimes when a person is so sick that they can't communicate, it's very traumatic. It's very traumatic because communication, speech, is what makes us distinctly human. So Rabbi Meir says a person doesn't say things with absolutely no meaning. Now again, a person may say things with the wrong meaning. A person may say things with misunderstood meaning. But Lamaisa, everything I say has a meaning. Therefore, Rabbi Meir says like this: that when we'll see what Rabbi Meir's statement. Ein adam motzi dvar levatala. Therefore, Beis Shammai will say, when the guy said, Hareini Nazir, minat dvela, minat grogros, minat dvela, how do we understand that statement? So I'll say, take a look once more at the Rush. Rabbi Meir da amar ein adam motzi dvar levatala. It's about like halfway down in the Rush. Be'erchin, perish ha'omer mishkali alai, Kamar Meir, omer erech kli zeh alai, o erech pachos mi ben chodesh, no sin damim. Umefarish tamei mishum de'in adamotzi dvar lo atala. Yesh lano shetal kisavra haya shay nazir kagavnas. We'll say it happens to be the Rush. The Rush actually happens to quote Rabbi Meir appears in Maseches Nedarim. We shouldn't have to get into the examples right now, but the idea Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, if a person makes a statement, even if the statement appears nonsensical, essentially what we do is we reinterpret the statement in a way that has a halachically meaningful definition. So, for example, Beis Shammai will say like this: a guy says, "Harini Nazir, mina grogros mina dvela." So, what does Beis Shammai? According to Beis Shammai, what's happening over here? What does the guy intend to do? What does he intend to do? To become a Nazir. So, why did he say figs? Why did he say figs? Because he didn't come to Daf Yomi shir. right? Because the truth is he misunderstood Nazirus. What he means is to go ahead and become a Nazir. He's mistaken about some of the details, but we don't throw out the entire statement because he's mistaken about some of the details. Why? Because Beis Shammai holds like Rabbi Meir, Ein Adam Motzi Dvarav Levatala, that a person does not go ahead and make meaningless statements. A person can make misunderstood statements, misinformed statements. So therefore, Beis Shammai says, when the guy says Harini Nazir and Agrogros and Advela, he's mistaken about the halachos of Nazir. But the statement is still binding, right? The acceptance of Nazirus is still absolutely unequivocally correct. We just have to inform him about the details. We'll say, by the way, just what a way to live life. Just what a way. Imagine for a moment if we accepted, before we said the Rambam Paskins, but imagine if we accepted halacha l'maisa, the statement of Rabbi Meir, and measured everything we said, right? Just to live life, ein adam motzi dvarav levatala. To recognize, imagine if you accept that as a halacha, right? That again, the halacha is a person cannot make meaningless statements. Imagine how much better life would be. Imagine how much better our lives would be, our families' lives would be, our friends' lives would be, if we were careful not to make meaningless, empty statements. Incredible. In any event, that's Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel Savrila, Rabbi Yossi. So Beis Hillel holds like Rabbi Yossi. What is Rabbi Yossi? The Amar bigmar dvarav adam nitbas. Now, I say, here's what's interesting. The way this statement sounds like, it sounds like it's being interpreted, is that we look at the last thing a person said. And I will say, now the truth is that statement is going to need a little bit more definition. Take a look again at the Rush. I apologize for keep drawing you to the Rush. Rabbi Yossi da Amar af bigmar dvarav adam nitbas gabe harezeh tumuras ola utumuras shlamim. The Kalman Rabbi Yossi. So I will say, this is actually an interesting case. Let's say a guy says the animal should be an ola and the shlamim. So we'll say, so what do you do with a statement like that? Because an ola and the shlamim are two different types of karbanos. So how can you be both? How can you be both? So we'll say the answer is you can't. But well, you can. So what do we do? Essentially, according to Rabbi Yossi, when a person makes two contradictory statements, they're essentially both true. They're both true. Now, we'll say in this case of how do you go ahead? A guy says this animal should be an ola, this animal should be a shlamim. How do you accept both of those as being true? Essentially, let the animal graze until it develops a mum. We go ahead and we sell it, and then what? V'yavi b'dameh chatzia ola v'chatzia shlamim. Use half of the money to buy an ola, half of the money to buy a shlamim. So I'll say, what's the application in this case? Shtehen chayil shtehen hachanai mitchila hayadaita lomar harini nozim min agrogros. So now listen to this. So Rabbi Yossi will say, see, it's an interesting machlokas. Rabbi Meir is saying that a person never says nonsensical things, meaningless things. Therefore, when the guy says Harini Nazir min agrogros min advela, he means to be a Nazir, but he's misinformed about the fact. So we have to educate him. Fine, but he's a Nazir. So Beis Hillel on the other hand holds like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says that sometimes a person will say contradictory things and they're both correct. They're both correct. So I will say, what now? How does that apply over here? V'hai neder upesachimo. So in this case, I will say, what happened over here? He made a neder to be a Nazir, and then the Pesach, the opening or the release of the Nazir, of the neder, is right alongside of it. How so, I will say? Because essentially, the fact that he says Harini Nazir min agrogros min advela indicates to us what? He never meant to become a Nazir. He never meant to go. How do we know that he never meant to become a Nazir? Because he's talking about details that have nothing to do with Nazirus. So from the way that he ended this statement makes it absolutely clear that the first part of the statement is 100% meaningless. So the Gemara is suggesting over here that the fundamental machlokas in Shammai Silo is the machlokas Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. Beis Shammai holds like Rabbi Meir, namely, Ein Adam Motzi Dvarav Levatala. Person does not say things for no reason, and therefore when he says Harini Nazir min agrogros min advela, he is becoming a Nazir. He's becoming a Nazir. He is just misinformed about the details. Versus Beis Hillel holds like Rabbi Yossi, literally bigmar dvarav adam nitbas. I will say so again. When that means at the end of one word, one is held to the end of one's words. What that means is when you make multiple statements that are contradictory, we view them as all being true. as all being true. Right? You would have articulated all these at the same time, but you couldn't, so they're all correct. Therefore, when a person says, Harini Nazir, Bigrogos B'dveila, he's saying a Nazir, but then he's also saying, I'm being a Nazir based on the fact that I can't eat figs or figs, all different kinds of figs. That indicates to us that he never really accepted Neder Nazirus, and therefore, there's no Nazirus over here. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Beis Shammai nami nadir pesachimo. So also, what does Beis Shammai do with this? What Beis Silber is saying is pretty compelling. They both say he's making a neder haredi nazir, but the Pesach, right, the opening for the release of the neder is right there alongside of it. Because both say he says haredi nazir, but then what does he say in the next breath? Minegrogos minadveila. So I'll say that's the Pesach. So what does Beis Shammai do with this? Ella Beis Shammai sari la Rabbi Meir. Da'amar ein adam motzi dvar levatala. Again, as we said before, Beis Shammai holds like Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds that a person does not make meaningless statements. V'chevan da'amar hareini nazir. Once he says the phrase hareini nazir, I will say it's almost as if we kind of put like a period after that. Hareini nazir. I'm a nazir. So we'll say what happens after you say hareini nazir? You're a nazir. I kika amar min agrogos min adveila li'ishtaluye. And I will say ultimately again, when he goes ahead and he says minagrogros minadveila, ultimately again, let me read one line. Beis Shammai letamad da'amri ein she'ela behektish. So I said it's very interesting. So ultimately again, when he says minagrogros minadveila, so what is he coming to accomplish? So as I take a look at the Rush for just a moment. So take a look, it's actually the first wide line of the Rush. Umeshani mitoch she'ein adam otzi dvar levatala, mereshis dvar damar harini nazir, havi nazir, umashar min agrogros, daininon le bechazora, sherotza limtso pesach she'ela lenidro, ki adam hamischarit al nidro, ubolifnei chacham, uposeach bepesach shel charata, lishol al nidro, Gam zen ischart besoch kadei diba va'amar shehei nikar bazeh shesoser masham hareini nazir v'loazin abasir. We'll say now, watch this. This is incredible. Let me tell you this outside, I don't see it inside. According to Beis Shammai, here's what's happening with the neder. So what happens? A guy goes ahead and says, hareini nazir. You will say, what happens according to Beis Shammai, what happens after you say hareini nazir? What happens after you say hareini nazir? You're a nazir. Why? Based on Rabbi Meir. Ein adam motzi dvar levatala. So why does he say minad grogros and minad dveila? So I will say, Rabbi Shammai will say like this. He is now trying to find an out. He has Nazir remorse. It's very common, right? I was in the same sentence. This does happen, right? I say something like, oh no. So I'll say, so he has Nazir remorse. So literally again in the same sentence he's trying to get out of it. How is he trying to get out of it? By showing that he didn't really know what he was getting into. Right? So in other words, by showing that I did not understand what Nazirus was. How am I showing how am I trying to show that I had no idea what I got into? By saying hareini nazir and then saying, minad grogros minad dveila. So I will say, he's trying to get out of the Nazirus. That's what's happening over here. He's actively trying to get out. Now I will say, now what happens when he tries to get out? I'm sorry, just finished the Rush. He says, so he's trying to create his own Pesach by showing I didn't really know what I was signing up for. Now, here's what's interesting. Now, Beis Shammai says that doesn't work. Why does Beis Shammai say that doesn't work? Now, if you look at the rest of the Rush, Beis Shammai letamad da'amar lekamon de hektish b'taos hektish. But we're going to see Beis Shammai holds that halacha l'maisa, when you make something mistakenly hektish. When you make a mistake and you make something hektish, you can't get out of it. Well, in other words, once you make something hektish, you can't back out of that. So we'll say, so now back to the Gemara. Beis Shammai letamad da'amri ein she'ela behektish v'chevan de'ein she'ela behektish ein she'ela benazirus. So I will say, this is absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. So I'll say, so now watch what's happening according to Beis Shammai. Here we go. A guy says, hareini nazir. So we'll say, so step one, how does Beis Shammai understand that statement? How does he understand that statement? The first important thing is punctuation. Right? What's the punctuation? Hareini nazir, period. You're a nazir. Now we'll say, so now what's happening? What's happening in the rest of the statement? What's happening in the rest of the statement is nazir remorse. Nazir remorse. Oh my gosh, what did I do? I want to get out of it. How do I try to get out of it? By pretending or by showing that I had no idea what I was getting into to begin with. So namely, again, what do I say? Oh yeah, I'm a Nazir. From what? From figs. From figs. The Shah says, no, doesn't work. Doesn't work. Does not work. The same Rabbi say again, that hektish betos is hektish, that if you are makdish something accidentally or mistakenly, Allah Kalman is still hektish. So too, if you take on a neder nazirus, even mistakenly, it is still a neder nazirus. Now, both say, we'll discuss. Remember, nazirus is a neder, so we will discuss about sheleimah when it comes. Right? Is there hakoras nedarim? Is there hakoras nedarim? Ultimately, again, by nazirus, we'll talk about that now. But for now, what Beis Shammai is saying is, you're trying to get out of it by saying you made a mistake. That is not going to work. That's not going to work. That's Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel sabi Rabbi Shimon. Beis Hillel is like Rabbi Shimon. What does Rabbi Shimon say? This nan was very interesting. Rabbi Shimon poter shelo isnadev kiderech hamisnadev. Now both say Beis Hillel is like Rabbi Shimon. Now both say, okay, who's Rabbi Shimon? Who's Rabbi Shimon? And what does he hold? Take a look at the last line of the Rush. Last line of the Rush on Tessim Aleph. Rush says, "Kabe hare alai mincha min asoros." This is actually a fascinating case, which we're going to spend some time focusing on today. Listen to the following case. A guy says, I hereby commit myself to bring a mincha from barley. From barley. Then I will say, now remember, a carbon mincha is not brought from barley. What does a carbon mincha brought from? Soles, fine flour. So a guy saying, I'm bringing a carbon mincha from barley. What's the halakha in such a situation like that? So look at the Rush. The Ka'amar poter shelo isna gabi hare alai mincha min asarim. The Ka'amar poter shelo isnadei kiderech hamisnadvim hachanami amid days. And the Rush hachanami lo nader kiderech hanodrim she'ein nazir min hagrogro. So we'll say, listen to this. So therefore, again, let's just read the last line on Amud Aleph. Ubeis Hillel Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Hillel holds like Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon says that if a person says, Hare alai minchas sa'orim, I'm going to bring a mincha of sa'orim, of barley, such a statement is absolutely meaningless. Why? Because it's false. There's no such thing as a mincha from sa'orim. So when you go ahead and you obligate yourself to something which does not exist in halacha, your statement is void. Therefore, again, when a person says, Harini Nazir, mina grogros, mina dvela, what's going to be the halacha? What's going to be the halacha? There's no nazirus. Why? Because there's no such concept, there's no construct of nazirus where a person is obligated to abstain from figs. There's no construct like that. Therefore, Beis Hillel will say that there is no nazirus in this particular situation. Shabbos says, top of Tazim Lebeis. Masnisin deloki aikano. So we'll say, our Mishnah does not reflect the following view. The Sanya, Rabbi Nosson Renesson says, Beis Shammai omrim nodur v'nazir. Now both say, now watch this. There is another topic that's not being introduced, which is, I will say, here's the interesting shayla. The Gemara alluded to this before. Now we're going to see it explicitly, and we're going to see this in the Rambam as well. I will say, when a person says Harini Nazir, min hagrogros min advela. So we've been focusing on whether or not a person in this situation is a Nazir. Are you a Nazir or not a Nazir? But there's another piece to this, which is, maybe I'm not a Nazir, but maybe what? Maybe I'm Nador. In other words, maybe what I've effectively done is taken a neder not to eat figs. Interesting, right? In other words, because maybe maybe the way we understand the statement over here is obviously can't be a Nazir because there's no such thing as Naziros from figs. But maybe I'm utilizing the lashon of Nazir to say that figs are prohibited to me, and therefore, again, figs become prohibited to me by the power of a neder. Is that happening over here? So the Gemara says, the sign of Binasin Omer, Beis Shammai Omrim, Nador Vin Nazir. So we're going to listen to this, an alternate version. Now this Bracha is a different version of our Mishnah. Rabbi Nassim says that in this case of Harini Nazir Min Agrogros, Beis Shammai says Nador Vin Nazir. You've made a neder prohibiting figs, and you are also a Nazir. So we'll say, Beis Shammai slams you both ways, right? Beis Shammai says, you're a Nazir, number one, you're a Nazir, and by the way, not only you're a Nazir, but what? You're also not allowed to eat figs. Right? In other words, Harini Nazir made you a Nazir, Min Agrogros Min Advela, effectively was a vow, was a neder, not to go ahead and eat figs. Beis Hillel says, Nadur ve'ein Nazir. Beis Hillel said, now watch this. This price is very different than our Mishnah. Right? In our Mishnah, the only thing the Mishnah recorded when it came to Beis Hillel was what? Eino Nazir. Now Rabbi Nassan is saying, Beis Hillel holds Nadur ve'ein Nazir, meaning what? You're not a Nazir. You're not a Nazir. Rabbi say again, that could be for a variety of different reasons. It could be like Rabbi Nassan, not Rabbi Nassan. It could be like Rabbi Shimon that we just learned before. Namely, again, there's no such concept of Nazirus when it comes to figs. So you're not a Nazir. But what? You have effectively made a neder prohibiting yourself from figs. Very interesting, right? So you're not a Nazir, but you are Nadur. You have made a vow prohibiting yourself from figs. So watch this. The Gemara says, Beis Shammai Sabila, because Beis Shammai will say either like Rabbi Meir, or Rabbi Huda. So Beis Shammai will hold like Rabbi Meir, namely again, then Ein Adam Motzi Dvarav Levatala, right? A person doesn't say meaningless statements, or like Rabbi Huda in the Mishnah, right? That would be Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel Sabila, Rabbi Yossi. Beis Hillel, on the other hand, holds like Rabbi Yossi, namely Bigmar Dvarav Adam Nitbas. That everything a person says ultimately again is meaningful, and therefore when a person prohibited figs to himself, Rabbi say, he wasn't just saying that in a nonsensical fashion, but rather what was he doing? He was creating a neder not to eat figs. Lishnachrina, shall I say an alternate version of this? Lishnachrina, Amrila Rabbi Nassan Omer. So I say an alternate version is Rabbi Nassan says as follows. Beis Shammai Omrim Nadur ve'eino Nazir. So now listen to this. Another version of this machlokes. Multiple say. Just to understand what's happening over here. We have a machlokes in the Mishnah between the Tanakh and Rabbi Huda. How to understand the machlokes? We now spent time trying to figure out who Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel hold like respectively. Now we have a brisa, and I will say in the brisa there's two more versions of the machlokes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. A lot going on over here. So we'll say in this Lishnach, we need an alternate version. This is Rabbi Nassan. Rabbi Nassan says, Beis Shammai Omrim Nador ve'eno Nazir. Beis Shammai says that when you say Harini Nazir, min agrogros min advela, Nador, you have taken on a neder to prohibit figs, but you are not a Nazir. Wow. Rabbi says now a totally different version. In this version, even Beis Shammai agrees that you are not a Nazir. What Beis Shammai is saying is, you've made a neder not to eat figs. Beis Hillel says, Lo Nadur velo Nazir. Ultimately, again, you have not made a neder, and you're not a Nazir. Beis Hillel says nothing. No neder, no Nazir. So we'll say in this case, Beis Shammai Rabbi Yehuda. Beis Shammai hold like Rabbi Yehuda, i.e. in the Mishnah, that ultimately, again, a person is taking on a neder. Beis Hillel Rabbi Shimon, and Beis Hillel will hold like Rabbi Shimon, namely, again, that a person cannot create a construct that does not exist in halacha. Fine. So we'll say, so now, four versions in Machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Tanakama's version of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda's version of the Mishnah, two versions in the Brisa. Okay, hold tight. Tanan Hasan. What we learned there? We learned, listen to this. We'll say, now this is the statement of Rabbi Shimon that we quoted earlier. So here we go. Tanan Hasan. Ha'omer harei alai mincha lahad minas orim. So I'll say, this is what we quoted, this is what the Rosh quoted before. A guy says, I'm going to bring a mincha from barley. Okay, so I'll say, so now remember again, there is no such thing as a carbon mincha from barley. So this guy saying, I'm going to bring a carbon mincha from barley. So the Gemara, what's the halacha? Yavi minachitim. You bring it from wheat. Okay. Kemach, a person says, I'm going to bring a mincha. We'll say kemach is regular flour. Now remember again, a carbon mincha is normally brought from soles, fine flour. Yavi soles. Even when the guy said kemach, ultimately again brings soles, says bring fine flour. Shelo b'shem levona. A guy says I'm going to bring a carbon mincha without oil and frankincense. Yevia b'shem levona. Bring oil and frankincense. Okay. Chatzi isaron. A guy says I'm going to bring a half the isaron. We'll say there's no such thing as a mincha of a half the isaron. Yavi isaron. Should I bring a full isaron? Isaron b'achza. Ultimately, again, he says, I'm going to bring 1.5 isaron. Once again, there's no such thing like that. Mincha exists in full measures of isronos. Yavi shnayim. Ultimately, again, you have to go ahead and bring to complete this order. So we'll say, what's happening over here? Essentially, I will say this is actually fascinating. See, the way we're understanding this situation is as follows. What is the guy saying? Harei alai mincha. Right? He's saying Harei alai mincha. Now, I will say that interestingly enough, then he's qualifying it with all of these statements that don't work with karba mincha. So we'll say essentially sounds like what we're doing over here is what? We're taking the first part of the statement of Harei alai mincha, and then what are we doing? We're aligning the rest of his statements with that first one. So you said Harei alai mincha, but then you're throwing in barley, then you're saying no shem no levona, then you're saying no happy Sarah. Those things don't work. So we're assuming that when you said Harei alai mincha, you meant to bring a mincha. You were just misinformed or uninformed about the details of mincha. Therefore, we're going to align the rest of your statements ultimately again with your first. So we'll say, I'll just point out something amazing. If you think about this is an incredible metaphor for tshuva. We'll say, why does tshuva work? Right? If you think about it, right? I commit navera, and I have the power of tshuva. We spoke about this 2 days ago. We spoke about this on Monday. Right? Why these in general these sugis have a lot to do with tshuva. So if you think about this, what's tshuva? Tshuva means that I have the ability to go ahead and realign my actions. Right? So I commit an avera, now I do tshuva. Depending on the type of tshuva, will determine the nature of the realignment of the action. Right? Tshuva me'ava, tshuva out of love, could even turn my averos into mitzvos. Tshuva miyura, tshuva motivated out of fear, could turn my averos, intentional averos, into accidental averos. Why is that possible? They'll say, because at the end of the day, the Ribono Shel Olam knows what my true ratzon is. What is my true will in this world? My true will is to serve Hashem. My true will is to do what is right. That is my desire. So what happens? So I'll say, what's the disconnect between my desires and my actions? That disconnect is like a lot of stuff that's going on inside of me. That disconnect is a lot of times I'm misinformed, I'm uninformed, I'm mistaken, most notably mistaken about the things that are going to make me happy in life. I'm mistaken about the things that are going to give me a sense of fulfillment. So I think that chait is where it's at. I think that chait is going to make me happy. I think that chait is going to give me pleasure. So I do all these different things in an effort to find fulfillment, to find happiness, to find shleimus, and then I'm wrong. So we'll say, what's the process of tshuva? The process of tshuva is where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I know who you really are, and I know what you really want. So I'm going to give you the space to realign and to get it right. I will say, isn't that this sugya? A guy says, Harei alai mincha. I want to bring a karba mincha. Right? I want to bring a karba mincha. And I will say, then what does he do? He rattles off like a whole bunch of nonsensical stuff. Right? I have a stated life mission. I want to be a tzaddik. I want to be a chassid. And then what happens? I go ahead and I go off in all these different negative pathways. Tshuva reinterprets. Tshuva, again, I have to do something in order to allow for that realignment. But also in the same way when the guy says mincha, ultimately, again, what do we say? Okay, we know what you want. Therefore, we're going to help you get back on the right path in life. I will say, by the way, it's also interesting because halacha l'meisa, what does tshuva begin with? I will say, what's the first step in tshuva? Right? Vidui, confession, which is charata. What I will say, because what do you need? A person needs to articulate what they want. Same idea. A person says, if you articulate what you want, the system could help you. Harei alai mincha, okay, you're making all of these mistakes, no problem. We'll help you get on the right path in life. Person wants to do tshuva, we'll say the first step is not actional. The first statement is a statement of declaration. What do you want? Or more appropriately, I've done wrong, and here's what I want out of life. You make that explicit statement, Kadosh Baruch Hu will help you get on the right path. It's incredible. Rabbi Shimon says in this case, poter. No. The guy says, Harei alai mincha, and then you make all of these mistakes about the details. You're part of mincha. Why? Because I always say this is a mistake in mincha. This is not the normal mincha, right? This is not the proper way for mincha. So man tana, dechi ama harei alai mincha min asara mevi min achitim. So who's the opinion who says that when you say, I hereby commit myself to bring a karba mincha from Sa'orim, that in fact you bring it from Chitim, who is that opinion? Amar Chizkiya b'machlokes shnuya. So Chizkiya says this is a machlokes. It's a machlokes. Beis Shammai. And in fact, it reflects the view of Beis Shammai. After all, Lav Armi Beis Shammai. Didn't Beis Shammai say in our Mishnah, Ki Amar Mina Grogros and Mina Dvelos Havi Nazir? After all, isn't Beis Shammai the opinion who says that when a person says, I'm a Nazir, from figs, that he is a Nazir? That he's a Nazir. So to Achenami, Ki Amar Mina Sa'orim, maybe Mina Chitim. So the Beis Shammai will be of the opinion that when you say, I hereby commit myself to bring a mincha from Sa'orim, that again, we look at your statement, and we say you mean to go and bring carbon mincha, or we interpret it as obligating yourself to bring from chitim, from wheat. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, afilu tema divrei akol. The truth is, this could even be reflective of all the opinions. In other words, I will say, this case of harei alai mincha, so I'll say again, when the guy is saying harei alai mincha, I'm committing myself to bring a mincha, and then he says minas sa'orim, from barley. So I will say, so now, what's the halacha? The halacha is he's obligated to bring carbon mincha, but he's got to bring it from the chitin, from wheat. So whose opinion is this? So again, obviously it goes according to Beis Shammai, or at least it's easy to align with Beis Shammai, because Beis Shammai's opinion that says, Haredi Nazir, mina grogos mina dveila. What does Beis Shammai say? You're a Nazir. You're a Nazir. So Beis Shammai is the opinion who says that when you make a first declarative statement, and then you make a mistake about the details, we realign your details with your core mission statement. So your core mission statement was to be a Nazir. Fantastic. You're mistaken about the details. We'll simply realign that. You see, Harei alai mincha. I want to bring a mincha. Then you see minasorim from barley. You're mistaken about it. We'll realign the details with your core statement. Comes on Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says the truth is, in the case of Harei alai mincha, it could reflect the view even of Beis Hillel. How so? Listen to this. Ba'omer elu hayisi yodea shenodrin kach lo nadarti kach elakach. Shabbos said this is a good one. So what's the case? The case by the mincha case could be a guy who says, Harei alai mincha minas sa'orim, and then we tell him, oh, by the way, you can't bring a mincha from sa'orim. He's like, oh, had I known that, I would have never said minas sa'orim. Okay, so also I said, now this becomes an easy case, right? So, okay, if the guy himself is saying, had I known, I would have never said minas sa'orim, okay, that case obviously will work. Amar Chizkiah, lo shanu ela sha'amar minas sa'orim. I watched this. The Chizkiah says, however, even the ability of Abosai to engage in what we'll call halachic realignment only works if your statement is somewhat rooted in reality. Right? Somewhat rooted in reality. So in other words, you said, I'm going to bring carbon mincha from sorim, from barley. So I will say, at least when you say barley, you're what? You're in the ballpark. Right? You're in the ballpark. Right? You're in the grain family. However, aval amar min ha'adoshim, listen to this. Chizkiah says, but if you said, I'm going to bring carbon mincha from what I will say, from lentils, that is such an irrelevant statement. It's such a nonsensical statement that everyone will agree you haven't said anything. Which I will say, so just the logic thing is, we could go ahead and realign as long as what? You're in the ballpark. In the ballpark. So you mentioned the wrong kind of grain. Okay, it's all in the family. But you're saying you're going to bring a carbon mincha from adashim, from lentils. Lentils have nothing to do with anything. They're not even in the ballpark of karbanos. Halach l'maisa, your statement is meaningless. So I'll say, this is fascinating. Michti, Chizkiah kimam mokim lo masnisin. So who would Chizkiah align our Mishnah with? Beis Shammai, like Beis Shammai. Ay v'ha adoshin legabe mincha ki grogros legabe nazir damu. 1 second, listen to this. Right? Lentils to a mincha are no different than figs to a neder nazirus. Right? The say it's pretty good, right? Pretty solid reasoning. In other words, lentils are no less shaykh to mincha than figs are to nazirus. And yet what? And yet Beis Shammai says that if you say hareni nazir min agrogos min adveila, that you're a nazir. So I'll say, using that same logic, if you said harei alai mincha min ha'adashim from lentils, that should work as well. The Rabbi Shmuel Silber. So how do we Chizkiah? We'll see. Chizkiah retracted his position. He retracted this. Okay. Va'amai hadrabei. Well, why did Chizkiah retract it? Amarava masnisin keshisei. Because the Mishnah was difficult for him. How so? The Mishnah by mincha. My area, the time minas sa'orim. Why did the Mishnah set it up that the guy says harei alai mincha minas sa'orim from barley, lisni minha adoshim. Let him write. Let the Mishnah write the case. I am bringing a mincha from lentils. Or what? In other words, I would say, if you want to illustrate a rule, so doesn't it make sense to illustrate it with what? The most extreme case. Eliezer Chizkiya ki ka'amri beishamai hazel kredi huda. So I will say, ultimately again, so Chizkiya holds that beishamai in the Mishnah go like Rabbi Huda. And I will say, what did Rabbi Huda say in the Mishnah? That beishamai agreed that when you say harini nazir min agrogros, I will say, Rabbi Huda says, beishamai holds, you're not a nazir. You're not a nazir. So what have you done? You've made a neder not to eat figs. Why? Because at the end of the day, grogros are too far away from the zirus to be understood as having made a neder nazir, even according to beishamai. Rabbi Yochanan says, afilu min ha'adashim. Rabbi Yochanan says, halacha l'maisa, even if a person said, harei alai mincha, min ha'adashim, that creates a binding obligation to bring a korban mincha. I bahar Rabbi Yochanan hu da amr ba'omer ila yisir der she'nojin kach, lo nadarti kach elakach. But 1 second, Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion that says that the case of the mincha is where the guy says, I made a mistake. Had I realized that korban mincha can only be brought from chitin, I would have said chitin. So the Gemara says, you're right. L'dvar de Chizkiya d'kamar. Rabbi Yochanan ultimately again is responding to Chizkiya. So again, what is he saying? At my time, Chizkiya, why did you retract your position? Mishum delo katan min adashim. Because the Mishnah did by mincha did not say lentils. Dilma lomi bay kamar. Maybe Rabbi said the Mishnah is employing the stylistic concept of lomi bay. Lomi bay Rabbi means you don't have to say this. You could even say this. Meaning what? So the Gemara says lomi bay ki amar me adashim demaisi mincha mal yasa. So it goes without saying that when a person says Harei alai mincha min ha'adashim, that ultimately he's obligated to bring a regular korban mincha. Why? Because it will say he's clearly retracting that position because he recognizes that there's nothing to talk about when it comes to adashim. So he just made a mistake. Tafos lashon rishon. We look at the first thing he said. He said Harei alai mincha, and therefore he's obligated to bring a mincha. But maybe when he said Harei alai mincha min hasaorim, I will say maybe he dafka meant he knew what he was talking about. And he dafka said saorim. I will say, why would he say saorim? Because I will say there are kamaros that come from saorim. So the hakikamar, last line, kidsha kimincha saomer. If this korban can become kadosh, like the minchas omer. I will say, remember again, the korban omer comes from what? Comes from barley, top of yud, o ki minchas sota, or I will say like the minchas kinos of a sota. So I'll say, here's the chaf. There are karbanos that do come from barley. So maybe he's saying, harei alai korban hasorim, I agree to bring this mincha from barley, if this mincha can become kadosh like other menachos which are brought from barley. What are other menachos brought from barley? The korban omer, the korban sota. So the Gemara says, ilo, lo. But if it cannot become consecrated like those karbanos, halacha l'maisa, I'm not going to be makdish it. Kamash malam demaisi min achitim. And I will say the chiddush is that no, even though we said this, we reinterpret, we write, or even though it's like he said this, we reinterpret his statement to be that he's bringing a normal korban mincha from Chit, and that's the Chiddush. Good, Rabbi say. Sorry, Pascal, let's go back. Right, remember again, all of this revolves around a korban machlokes. What's the korban machlokes? Shabbos say we got on many different not tangents, but different directions. What's the korban machlokes? Harei alai nazir mina grogros. Rabbi say, what is the halacha in that case? Are you a nazir like Beis Shammai or not a nazir like Beis Hillel? So Rabbi say, listen to this. The Rambam Paskins. This is Hilchos Nazirus, Perek Aleph Halacha Yud. Listen to this. Aval. Haomer hareini nazir minat grogos minat vela ki yotzei bahen. But says this: a person makes a net in naziros. I am a nazir from figs. What's the halacha? Here it is. Get ready. Hareza asur bahen ve'eno nazir. They both say this is actually quite wild. The Rambam Paskins like the first version in the Brisa on the top of Amud Beis. The first version of the Brisa. So the first version of the Brisa that Beis Hillel holds. You're not a Nazir. But what? You have made a neder prohibiting figs to yourself. Rabbi says in Gregg Rachel. So there's a whole discussion in the Kesef Mishnah about why the Rambam is choosing that girsa. Again, we'll have to have for a different time. Rabbi say, but that is how the Rambam finds it. So fascinating. Having Nazir minat grogos minat vela. You are not a Nazir. But The halacha of use it is you have made a neder, you have made a vow prohibiting figs to yourself. Rabosai, shkoyach. Oh, for how long? For how long again? And remember again, an unqualified neder continues on. I will say again, if this morning is the last shiva minyan at the book Walter Shiva home, so then we could help out with that minyan is much appreciated.